running of the presentation. We ask you to keep muted all time unless there's a reason that you need to speak. Thirdly, all questions should be addressed to us via the chat function. If you do, however, have problems typing in, for example, if you are using mobile phone or something, then do raise your virtual hand and we will come around to ask you that. Without further ado, I will welcome Ian Gilbert, the leader of the council, to start.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to see us and to take part in this consultation exercise this morning. For those of you who've been around a little while, we've following the same process in terms of setting out our budget, council budget, as we have in previous years. The Cabinet will agree a report in draft later today. This will then be subject to consultation, of which this event is part, a consultation with other council members through our usual process. We'll then consider that feedback and that will then go to a full council meeting in February. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of the headlines and the drivers behind the budget, and then I'm going to hand over to Jo Chesterton as the Council's Executive Director of Finance and Resources to go through a presentation in more detail. The key driver of this budget, as it is for councils up and down the country, is the increasing cost pressures within the care sector, social care sector, and particularly in terms of adult social care. We are faced with rising costs, and the council, in common with many of your organisations, is experiencing and will experience increased costs through inflation, feeding through to rising costs, potentially rising pay, and at the same time experiencing an ever increasing demand from our services in terms of looking after elderly, vulnerable adults and vulnerable children. So the primary measure within the budget and the primary reason why, and I'm sure you've all seen the proposed council tax of 3.99%. The reason for that is in order for us to be able to make an investment of some £5 million in addition to last year's in the care budget. That will pay for providers to be able to pass on, to be able to afford both the statutory burdens which have been placed on them through increase in the national living wage and increase in employer national insurance contributions, but also go further than that. And we're hoping it actually, well, it will lead to a real uplift in pay, particularly for those who are delivering domiciliary care, which is a sector that was under pressure previously, but now, but owing to COVID, is well, I think to say that the health and care sector is in crisis at the moment is not too strong a term. Southend is not unique in that. It is a national picture. In addition to the primary investment in adult social care, also investing in a number of other priority areas. We're continuing the large-scale investments into roads and carriageway, road and footway resurfacing, which has been I think, area of significant underinvestment many years. You know, this budget allows us to continue that. Significant additional investment in housing in terms of acquiring and refurbishing new council properties for those in need, of which there are many. Continued investment into our economic development team to allow us to work with businesses and continue those really important activities. Investment into the environment and our green priorities, including the pilots to try to phase out particularly harmful weed killers and pesticides, and use more environmentally friendly methods of maintaining the street scene. Continued investment is also into social services, young people, children's social services, which is another very important area. Obviously, like all councils, that investment necessitates making difficult decisions, and some decisions that won't be popular either with businesses or residents. We recognise that. This is the start of a consultation, and I am always very open-minded to hear ideas and suggestions that come forward during the next month or so. And yes, really want to hear your feedback and your questions and your sense of priorities. But I'm now going to hand over to Joe to give a more detailed rundown of the facts and figures. So over to you when you're ready, Joe.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Cheston, Deputy Chief Executive and Exec Director for Finance and Resources. Move to the next slide, please. Just to give you sort of a bit of a backdrop to sort of the budget development approach that we've adopted within the council. Clearly, as you're all aware, we've had continued uncertainty and financial impact of COVID-19 throughout 21-22. The continued fallout of the EU exit, and obviously the overall country's economic position. So we've had to bear all of that in mind and deal with that throughout 21-22. The organisation is still moving towards an outcomes-based budget organisation, and that the resources within the budget are being prioritised towards achieving the administration's priorities, the 2023 roadmap as part of the Southend 2050 ambition. We started building upon longer term budgets. If you recollect, going back a few years, we were sort of just dealing with 1 year at a time. It's really important now, given sort of the medium term financial position, that we're getting ourselves into a position to deal with things a bit earlier. So we're looking at more of a medium term budget, and this will come through as part of the bits that I'll be talking through in a little while. We've created a financial sustainability strategy, and we have our own medium-term financial strategy. These will be built upon and be reported into the final cabinet report when it comes up on the 15th of February. So overall, 22-23 sort of budget settings really continues our journey in terms of the above principles, despite the difficult financial and service circumstances we faced as an organisation over the last year or so. Next slide, please. So what's changed recently? Obviously, as I mentioned about COVID, has a massive impact on the council's operational financial management during 21-22. But the period 8 report, which is the budget monitoring report to the end of November, that also appears on the 13th of January, cabinet papers, puts us into a reasonable position that we should be able to sort of balance the books by the end of the financial year with the good, strong financial management we've had in year, and obviously with the government support that we've received around COVID-19. You may or may not be aware, but in December time, the government announces its sort of financial settlement for local authorities. We were expecting a 3-year one, or that's what we were promised by government. In the end, they only came up with a 1-year settlement. Because the fly in the ointment is, although they've announced a 1-year settlement, they have said there will be major reform of local government finance, which will impact upon business rates and sort of used to be known as revenue support grant, but probably going to be levelling up for 23-24. So this is about trying to redistribute resources up and down the country between sort of like the south and sort of Midlands and north. So at this stage, we don't know what the implications of that will be for the council for 23-24. So, but we just need to be aware of what's happening through 22-23 with the consultation around that. As Ian pointed out, there's significant demand and cost pressures in social care, particularly in children's and adults, which obviously need addressing within the budget, and obviously the impact we've had through COVID-19. And also you will have seen obviously the high inflationary pressures that are being experienced at the moment, which will continue for a period of time as well. So some of the things that have moved, our council tax base, i.e. the number of sort of properties that we get council tax on, has increased slightly. So that's a better position for us to help support the budget. But also with that good in-year financial management for 21-22, when we set that budget for 21-22, we used £2.5 million worth of reserves. At this stage, I don't believe we need that to use that reserves in 21-22. So therefore, we're using that to support the 22-23 budget. So overall, the final budget that you will see now will lead to another net investment budget, follows on from last year's net investment budget, despite all those challenges that we have experienced and the sort of disappointment of only having a 1-year settlement from government. So the next slide, please. So this is some of the detail Ian's already mentioned, but just to say in terms of council tax increasing by 3.99%, 1.99% for general use and 2% for specifically for adult social care, and we're using 1% of the carryover from 21-22 that we had left. If we didn't bring that forward into 22-23, we would have lost that, so we had to bring that forward. And given obviously the significant pressures in adult social care, it's really important that we did utilise that full 2% available to us. You can see there the sort of the weekly increase on a Band D property. That's going to be around £1.15. But within Southend, 70% of our properties are in the lower bands of A, B and C, so they will have lower weekly increases below that £1.15. The police and fire council tax increases will be added to our overall council tax, but we don't know yet their final position on those. But we do know Leeds Town Council has proposed a 0.53% increase in their base, and that will be passed on to those in the Leon-Sea area. As I mentioned, the budget is we're using £2.5 million of reserves rolled over from 21-22, which under my reserve strategy, I expect to be replenished over the lifetime of the medium-term financial strategy. So that's over the next 3 to 4 years. But also as part of the way we've been able to deal with the collection of council tax and business rates, we have a collection fund surplus of around £1.5 million, which we're utilising as well to set the budget. And that's from the good performance in our collection in those sort of 2 areas. And it's something we statutorily have to do. So if we have a surplus on our collection fund, we have to apply it to setting the budget. As I mentioned, we're delivering a sort of a balanced and robust net investment budget for 22-23, and it starts the sort of the longer term, medium term approach that I was talking about, with continuing the programme of a range of big budget transformation reviews, which are set out in the report. And obviously the report again builds upon the combined revenue and capital resources, so we're having one overall resources report. So we go on to the next slide, please. Sorry, dog's just eating his bone against the skirting board there, making a noise. So apologies for that interruption. Key revenue budget proposals. So net investment, circa £7.8 million in 22-23. So £12.9 million investment, offset by around savings of £5.1 million. The key sort of investment, as Ian's pointed out, is in adult social care. There's an extra £5.5 million going into there, but there's quite significant sums of money in for other sort of staffing areas for things like housing, planning, ICT, community safety especially, and then also the usual things we have to cope with corporately, things like inflation, increments for staff and pay award, etc., and financing costs on our capital programme. The savings I refer to relate to new savings for 22-23, but also are ones that we identified in 21-22 that need to be delivered in 22-23. In terms of staffing for the council, the overall investment above identifies a further 26.4 FTE staff, some of which are permanent, or majority of which are permanent, but some relate to sort of new sort of one-off pilot proposals that we're doing, and things like, as Ian mentioned, the change around sort of weed spraying or not weed spraying in parks and open spaces. So the staff are reflected in some of those one-off proposals. And the savings of around 10 are literally the rollover of the sort of the second half of the business support review that was approved in the 21-22 budget. So actually there's no additional staff savings as part of the overall budget for 22-23. Next slide, please. As part of the budget, we normally put some one-off reserve support in for some specific projects, so we're continuing these. So the community safety winter and summer planning, so along the seafront area when we have those busy days at bank holiday, etc., so there's extra costs incurred, so we set some money aside for that. The school improvement programme, and then sort of some work on our transformation programme about how we work on some of our sort of budget savings ideas for future years. And as I mentioned, some one-off sort of pilot proposals and investor save and sort of the glyphosate in parks and open spaces, an events programme in 22 to support the Southend's new city status, an enhanced in-house foster care offer, which will be coming in terms of the detail with the rates of pay, but that's to improve those, to enhance that approach, and a moving traffic enforcement scheme. So there's some of the ideas that are coming forward as part of that, but more of those are set out in the appendices in the reports. Fees and charges, as I mentioned earlier on about inflation going up significantly, we're sort of trying to match that to a certain extent. So generally all fees and charges will go up by 4.2%, except for some key areas like parking, SEMS and CREMS, and adult social care. So there's more information on those within the report as well. In terms of capital, we're adding another £6 million into the programme in 22-23 for the carriageways and footways, and then adding a further £10 million onto the rolling programme, so into 26-27. So there's now been £60 million identified specifically for that particular project. There's some other key projects going on, such as more investment in the pier, which is required, some refurbishment and new modelling of the East Beach car park, coastal defence, where we need to have a rolling programme moving forward, and obviously to maintain a number of our properties in terms of fire safety and sort of mainly property refurbishment. But there's also money set aside in these subject to viable business cases for ICT to enable that transformation to happen for the council in terms of not only its infrastructure, so moving a number of the systems into the cloud, but also looking at how we're much more efficient in terms of our systems and processes and how we operate and how we can best respond to residents and businesses alike across the town. Majority of finance by borrowing, but we'll assess that as part of those business investment cases that come through to the investment board. And then also housing revenue account, which is basically for our council housing stock of 5,800 or so council homes, both sheltered housing units and general needs. Significant investment into that area over the next sort of 5 to 6 years. Hopefully you'll all been aware the council was very successful in receiving a levelling up fund bids, which basically relates to the Cliffs Pavilion and the sort of the city beach area and also the Southend-on-Sea port, fishing port area. So quite substantial sums of money coming in for that, and that's also gone into the programme. So overall, we'll still see a significant investment programme up to around £171 million through to 26-27. So going forwards, we do some work on estimating what we think the financial gap will be for the council over the next 4 years. So at this stage, we believe it's around £24.2 million. That's assuming that there's no change in the grant up or down from government as part of that local government financial reform that I talked about earlier on. Clearly, I'll be keeping an eye on that and see what comes out of the consultation. And through the year, this medium-term financial plan is a fluid plan, so we amend it up or down depending upon sort of various changes throughout the year. But particularly, we'll be keeping a close eye, as I said, on the local government finance reform. What does that mean to the council sort of government funding from 23-24 onwards? Next slide, please. So the housing revenue account I mentioned is just the account that looks after all our council housing and sheltered housing unit stock. In terms of the key headlines for that, there's a 4.1% increase. That's a government sort of set guideline approach. So it's the sort of consumer price index that relates around about October time plus 1%. And then we've applied that same increase through to garage rents. Service charges, excluding heating, will increase by nearly 11%. And then heating charges, quite perversely, are going down by 16.95% in sheltered housing units. But it's a calculation we have to do based upon the previous year's actual in terms of its costs and usage. But the expectation obviously will be something of an increase next year, given obviously what we've seen with sort of, prices increasing around gas, etc. But we're keeping a close eye on that and what support we can provide to sheltered housing unit tenants throughout the year, who will be in situ come April next year. And then a small point around just over half of our sort of nearly 5,900 households receive direct housing benefit support, so they won't get impacted significantly by these changes that are set out above. Next slide, please. So some key messages. We're still delivering towards the Southend 2050 ambition with this budget and some of the key priorities that are within the roadmap for 22-23, but also trying to cope with the local demand and cost pressures we're getting for key services. And all of that is driving our investment and disinvestment considerations and how we become outcome focused as an organisation. We have got a balanced budget, net investment budget, and we've got a clear longer term view of how we're going to proceed, both for our financial planning and sustainability purposes. I mentioned earlier on a programme of medium-term budget transformation reviews. They're set out in Appendix 8 of the report. There's a whole list of reviews there which the officers will be working on during 22-23 and working with the relevant administration to go through those to ensure that they're being delivered in time for the 23-24 budget and onwards. But overall, I can say, given our reserves position and how we're setting our budget compared to some of the stories you hear up and down the country for other local authorities, we as a council are still in a relatively strong and resilient financial position. One sort of key thing I need to flag is obviously what's coming down the road for 23-24. I've said it a few times already, but it really is a major risk. But the hope is that even with the government's intention to shift resources from sort of south to north, that as part of that sort of reform, they will be taking into account deprivation and other factors, which actually does benefit Southend in that extent. In terms of additional funding, so we would hope that it gets redistributed back to us through that way. But as I said, we'll find out a lot more as we work through 22-23. So finally, the next steps, as Ian mentioned, we've got today. We've got draft budget this afternoon, and then we've got a round of scrutiny committees commencing the week of the 7th of February. They're a week later now because of the by-election that's been held, parliamentary by-election on the 3rd of February. And then I I will do a round of opposition and administration briefings throughout January to support each of those groups into the scrutiny process. And then we will have a final budget considered at 15th of February, Cabinet, and then final budget to Council on the 24th of February, where we will finally set the budget and council tax level for 22-23. So hopefully that gives you a quick canter through that. The reports are online in terms of the council's website. There's quite a detailed report for the revenue and capital budget. I think there's about 17 appendices attached to it, but the key ones are appendices 6, 7, 8 and 9. 6 are the investments, 7 are the savings that have been put forward, 8 is the programme of medium-term budget transformation reviews, and Appendix 9 is the changes in fees and charges that I was talking about earlier on for SEMS and CREMS and for parking. So hopefully that helps. So I'll just hand back to Ian. Is that okay? Or we open it up to questions, I think. Is that what we normally do?
That's right.
And I think Councillor Collins is here as well, who's been supporting the Cabinet through the budget process as well in his new role as the portfolio holder for corporate performance and service delivery. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. There is one question in the chat already. It's just from Emily. Out of interest, is the repair of beach pools still on the agenda, or has it been deprioritised?
I don't know, pass now. Repair of beach pools, is that the main? I think it. Don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Does that mean the lagoon?
Lagoon.
I seem to recall that was
Tidal pools on the beach.
I honestly think that question is going to be taken away and responded to back in writing or by email. Emily, I'm sorry, that detail isn't here in front of me to that level, but I'm sorry, no, we will have to come back to you with a written answer.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. If anyone has any more questions, please put through chat and we'll come around to yours.
Or
raise your hand.
Yeah, since we're a small group, yeah, you can do that too.
You've clearly stunned everybody into silence with those figures, Joe.
Oh God.
There's a question coming from Matt. Are there any implications from the city status?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can take that one. There is a sum of money in the budget for us to progress events during the year. We've put £100,000 one-off money into that. Both us and various partner organisations are working really hard in putting together a programme of events to celebrate city status and help us make the most of it. People will be aware that the committee that Sir David formed to progress the bid has now taken on a role in terms of those events. They're working hard in conjunction with us for an event on the 13th of February at the Cliffs, for which tickets are on open sale. So I'll plug that. That week we'll also see the Luminosity event, which I'm pleased to see has got some really positive coverage recently. And I believe that there will be other events around that week to celebrate the award of city status. There's also longer term things going on throughout the rest of the year. So whilst it doesn't bring any direct cash benefits to the town, I do believe that the increased profile and positivity around it should hopefully benefit all sectors of the community. I saw another question there around when will city status be formalised. Don't have a definite answer for that, but I'm told it is likely to be within the next few weeks. So I don't think we'll have to wait long for it.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert. The next question is, how does our investment
Sorry, Suja, can I just come in on that? So we will have to get city status on the 26th of January. And then there will be a special council to commemorate that on the 16th of February. They're the dates now, I think we're talking about. So it's all, as Ian said, very soon.
Thank you, John. The next question is, I think I need to scroll back a bit. How does our investment in children's social care compare per head to other regions in the country?
Good question. When we had a review exercise into our children's services in the autumn, that report said that on the whole, actually, our children's services were well invested and ahead, and actually the funding was ahead of what you would get in other authorities. Clearly there's a lot of different elements to that. I don't know, Joe, if you've got any benchmarking information on that could be given.
Yeah, no, I haven't got anything to hand in terms of that, but yes, I can support that. We are in front, so we can definitely get some figures for you and do some comparisons. I think we have got that information available.
Can I add another commentary because of the budget preparation and down to what Councillor Gilbert's just said regarding Ofsted in their review, that the basis required to support caseload demanded. Ofsted recommend an average caseload of 18 cases per social worker. Southend is slightly above this level, so we're doing better than the benchmark, but I understand that we feel we can do better than that and take more pressure off, and we actually, part of this budget, are investing another 300,000 into that area to make that caseload even less. So we do understand the pressures, but we do feel that we are doing better than what Ofsted regard as a benchmark. Thank you.
And I see the same question asked in terms of adult social care. And I think I can say with confidence that historically Southend has been significantly below comparable or other authorities in terms of the unit cost of social care, which is one of the reasons why it's been necessary in this budget to actually increase that, particularly for the domiciliary care sector.
Thank you. Next question is, how do we feedback wide input from the voluntary sector to the consultation?
I imagine that can be emailed. Well, it can be emailed. I don't know whether there's an official consultation email address, but it can certainly be emailed to myself or to Joe or to Paul, and we'll very happily collate that and feed it in.
I hope that answers Christine's question. The next one, sorry, just bear with me. Is it a comment perhaps? It seems such a shame to see Southend Marine Activity Centre empty and decaying along the seafront when the seafront is a key asset. Does anyone want to comment, or shall I move to the next question?
On that particular one, there are plans for what's called a SMAC. So it's about sort of toilet refurbishing the sort of like the outlets either side of it. So that's being worked through at this point in time. I would expect to see something happening certainly in 22-23 on that.
Okay. Jane has a question about, can you answer the same question in relation to adult social care as well, please? I presume that's related to the comparison benchmarking. Is that right, Jane?
Yeah, I think that's what I was. I think that's what I was just referring to, because I spotted that Yeah, as I say, yeah, I'm sure that Joe could supply some exact figures for comparison, but we have been significantly under, below average for authorities on the unit cost of adult social care. That's a historical thing, not a new thing, and that is one of the reasons why it is, you know, so necessary to make the really significant investment in adult social care, and particularly in domiciliary care, which we're proposing to make in this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert. I've seen a hand raised up by Gaynor. Gaynor, would you like to unmute yourself and pop the question in?
Yes, hello everyone. I've just written it briefly in the chat, but it's basically, as most of you know, that I set up a Westcliff partnership, which day by day I'm still funding out of my own bank account. And I just think it's just so important that somewhere like Westcliff has an association that basically is representing the area. So if there's any money that could be found to pay for that, I was going to give up, but I just feel so passionate about it that it's so important, but I just don't think it's right that I'm paying for it. And as you well know, that I've already spent 2 years paying for the Hamlet Court Road Shops website and activities. And I mean, just to give you an example, I spent 5 hours last week researching about the Butler's Fishmongers that's just closed down, 113 years in use, with the only surviving smokehouse. And so I've paid again to find out all the information about the landlords, and I've written to them asking if they'll consider waiting for us to find a fishmonger before changing it into flats. I just think these things are just so important. And if we're talking about levelling up, it's people's everyday life that is important. So I really want this to be considered, please. You don't have to answer now, but I just want it to be noted that I just consider this extremely important for Westcliff, and we are the only town without an organisation and without funding. Every other town has got coastal community funds, various associations, and they all have funding attached to them.
I've got anyone picking this up. I just want to.
I'd just like to say that following the meeting that we had back before Christmas, I've actually put in a SIL funding bid, based partly on some of the costs that you provided for me. That is going through the process, which unfortunately is a bit of a bureaucratic process. But I am hopeful that that can actually provide at least some of the funding that you need to progress the Westcliff partnership. And I think other people can perhaps suggest other sources which can also go towards supporting it. So I do agree it's important, and I haven't forgotten about, although a lot of things have happened since we last met, I haven't forgotten about it, and it is something that I still do want to help with.
Right, that's great, thank you. And any idea when that might come through?
I'm hoping I might hear within the next week or two.
Right. Because what's
I am actively chasing.
Right, thank you. Because what's happening, as you know, I want to set up a professional website because I don't want it to be the same as the Hamlet Court Road one where I was doing everything, and because it didn't function, as a professional website, there wasn't a membership site, etc. So as soon as the professional site is set up, we can then have a paying membership, even if it's just £10 a year or whatever, to just start getting members. That would make a huge difference, and then that would begin to move towards self-funding. And then if we had a committee gradually build up, we could then bid for grants and funding elsewhere as well. So that would be brilliant, that first stage of actually getting a proper website set up. I mean, the one I've done is functioning, but it's probably, well, I would say it's fairly basic. It looks quite nice, but it doesn't do all the things it needs to do. So that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Gaynor, you would be pleased that there's a number of offers in the chat as well from Don G. King and Emily. I didn't say exactly financial offer. So you do have a look and link up with these people. And you would remember I sent you a various of kind of funding opportunities around as well. So if you do a look, hopefully you get something.
Writing, you know, although I was ill for 2 weeks over Christmas, in bed most of the time, not COVID this time. But no, that's good news. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, move to the next question by James. Why has Zone 1A seafront car parking been arbitrarily chosen for higher charges? Has proper research been done to ascertain if the burden could be spread more fairly across town?
Okay. As I said up front, whenever you're setting a budget, chances are you're going to have to take some decisions which are unpopular, and this is a consultation, and we are prepared to listen to other options that may be put forward that will still result in a balanced budget. However, I would dispute the fact that that's been arbitrarily chosen. Obviously, car parking income is our after council tax and business rates. It might and this probably getting to the point where it's level with government funding actually in terms of its importance to our overall budget. And so it is always necessary to decide whether or not it needs whether we need to increase parking charges. Parking charges in most areas of the town are being frozen, and I think when you consider where can actually sustain slightly higher prices, you look at actually the seafronts. And think that actually, rather than hitting town centre areas, for example, that actually, in terms of the whole commuter cost of a day trip, it's a smaller element and less likely to be harmful. Although in saying less likely to be harmful, I fully recognise that any increase of any type is going to be unwelcome to some people and to some businesses, and and it is something we'll give very careful consideration to as we're going forward.
Thank you. There's also another comment from Councillor Collins about Zone 3 car parks are also facing an increase in this budget. For your information, James. If there's any more questions, you could simply raise your hand if that helps. There's one coming from Anna Waite. I understand that footfall in High Street Modeley over a 12-month period is far in excess of footfall along the seafront to the west. So why, therefore, will Western Esplanade have by far the highest car parking charges?
I think, building on what I said before, again, it's, as I said, I fully recognise that any increase in parking charges is going to be unwelcome. But I do think that it is more important to protect and certainly from what residents' concerns voiced with me around the high street, which is, as all high streets are particularly vulnerable at the moment. And I am particularly concerned to protect the high street in any way and support the high street in any way that we realistically can. And that's why, I wouldn't support any increases in parking charges around the high street at this time. But as I said, this is a consultation and fully prepared to listen to other views and other potential ways of spreading the burden.
There's a follow-on question from James on the car parking charges. So last year, Councillor Woodley attempted to increase parking costs across the seafront to extortionable levels, taking chargeable hours to 10 p.m, facing a lot of backlash from the locals, visitors and businesses, and even national press. This has been taken back and revised, but it seems almost exactly the same parking hours are back and a huge increase on the daily parking. The only public comment by Councillor Woodley was business should stop moaning, which was published in the Echo. Any comment on that?
Okay, well, Councillor Woodley is not always the most diplomatic person while speaking to the press. However, what I would say is that the difficult decisions that we made last year on parking charges have actually enabled us to invest in the largest ever programme of roads and footway resurfacing, probably in the town's history. And that is something that actually the residents of the town have really started to notice and to appreciate. However, it's clear that we're still not doing enough in terms of maintaining our roads and our street scene, hence the need to continue to keep on looking at this. I have to push back on that slightly and say that some of the people claimed that what we were proposing last year would somehow be the death of the town and and totally put people off coming here, and that certainly hasn't happened. During the COVID, when COVID has allowed people to come, people have come, and you look at visitor numbers for the pier, for example, where we actually had record months over the summer, and footfall actually, and visitor numbers remain high, and I'm sure that's something that we can continue to build on. But as I said, it's a consultation, and we will consider all options and all points of view as we're moving through the process.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert. I haven't seen any further questions. Give you one more minute to type in. If not, we might draw the meeting to a close slightly earlier than scheduled. But in the meanwhile, if any remaining questions that we didn't manage to answer or get back to you, we will communicate via emails. If any further questions that arise later on, like Christina asked, do get in touch with us. I'm quite happy to be the contact. You can send it to me and I can filter through and forward it on to the relevant people for answers. It looks.
I think Matt's waving.
Hi, Matt.
Sorry, one last minute one. I was just thinking about the voluntary sector. Obviously, this is a voluntary sector consultation. What part can the voluntary sector play to help, particularly with the adults and children's social care pressures? I'm just thinking about prevention, early intervention, community engagement, that sort of thing. And obviously, the huge cost to the council is the social care demands and the escalating cost there, but I think the voluntary community sector can play a really important role in that sort of prevention, early intervention, community engagement support, and actually trying to keep people out of needing that social care, because once people are in that system, then the costs are so high, aren't they, that actually the more we can build that capacity in the community. I know we've got community builders, I know we've got the community investment fund, so there are things there, but I think there is more that could be done.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think that's, obviously a really good point. I would say obviously the voluntary sector has been extremely helpful in helping us deal with the crisis, and I know in particular Christina and Savs have been fully involved in our efforts of managing the really difficult situation that we have been in, and I must put on record our thanks to them. Yeah, I was aware as we were starting this briefing that the voluntary sector isn't particularly mentioned a great deal within the budget. I think that's because we tend to focus on the things which are changing, and within the voluntary sector, our plans for the Community Investment Fund have been set out, and that is working its way through to implementation. But if anybody's got any suggestions or ideas in terms of how we can build on that, how we can work better together, and how, as you say, we can intervene earlier utilising help from the voluntary sector, please do let us know, get in touch, and I'll be very happy to have a conversation around it.
Thank you both. A further question from Anna has been submitted. How can my seafood restaurant in Western Esplanade compete with those in Old Lee when the car parking charges near me will be more than double?
Okay, that's a fair question. I would, I would again say that obviously different locations attract different levels of parking charge, and people expect that in areas of higher demand, charges will be higher, and that is always a factor in people's decisions. But as I said, it's a consultation, and we'll take that feedback on board.
Thank you. Looks like everyone seems to be happy now in terms of questions. If that's the case, if that's okay with you all, I would like to thank Joe, Councillor Ian Gilbert, Councillor Collins for all the answers and the information, and also thank you everyone for attending this session and made comments and inputs to the proposal, and thank Laura for supporting this event right now. So that leaves me to wish you a good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it's left of the sunny day like this. So hope you do get some lovely time out of it. I'll see you soon in some other capacities. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.